Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me Wednesday, September the 22nd. So I loved I loved writing the sixth book of the Walkerville Desires series. What I got to do was I got to introduce a family and a culture that are underrepresented in most American novels, stories, even, including romances, which is what I write. Renaissance is about a love story. There's Paz and Torquil who've just met, and there's the continuing stories between Bree and Rowan, Francis and Fiona, Martha, Janine, and Desmond, and Ruth and Trevor. And the family that I got to introduce in this book are the Miyoshis, Japanese Americans who have farmed in Walkerville since the early 1900s. Although the sort of main character in the book is Paz Miyoshi, I am very fond of her mother, Jerry. Jerry has turned out to be a character who really made me work to include her in the book. She wasn't easy like Martha, Janine, or even Francis and Fiona. So she's Paz's mother. She's Russell Miyoshi's daughter. And she's the standard bearer for the Miyoshi farms as it steadily declines for a number of reasons. At first, Jerry seemed to be somebody who was in the background, and she provided the needed conflict for her daughter to have left Walkerville and subsequently to come back home. And the truth, as I got to know Jerry, is that she's really an interesting person on her own. She's proud. She knows her place is on the farm, which is what she loves. And I learned also that she has had her own love story that was fraught with secrets, shame, and she made some decisions that were like cutting off her nose to spite her face, because that's the way she is. Some more background. Jerry's ancestors, the Okemi family, were one of the first Japanese American families in Walkerville to own land. In 1942, Executive Order 9022 effectively ordered all Japanese Americans along the U.S. West Coast to be interned for the duration of the war. They seized any assets these families had: land, treasures, money, homes, cars, businesses. In some communities, there's a shameful history of people taking advantage of the situation to take possessions of assets of those imprisoned families. But there's other stories of people and families stepping up to to do the right thing by their neighbors, holding property and possessions in trust until they came back. And Bendigo Tarleton's 3 times over great-grandfather helped the Okemis, as did the Montrose family and the Phelps family, who is Rowan's ancestors. These 3 families kept the Okemis' land, their treasures, money, home, and they kept it for them. They worked the land while the family was away. And 4 family members of the Okemi left for the relocation camps. And 3 years later, only Keiko and her 15-year-old daughter Daisy returned to Walkerville to farm the land. Daisy grew up and she got married, and her granddaughter Rachel married Russell Miyoshi, increasing their land. And they had 3 children, and Jerry was the middle child. And Jerry, very sarcastically says that every Japanese family needs a spare daughter to take care of the old folk, and that she's it. And because of this notion, for a long time, Jerry grew up living that life as a good Japanese girl, keeping her head down, making her family proud. Hazukashi is the Japanese word for shame. The Japanese go to great lengths to not have any shame in their personal lives, in their families, in their communities. And there's research suggesting that the 1942 executive order, which interred all of the Japanese people on the West Coast, this act, this declaration, created a culture of hazukashi amongst the Japanese Americans. You know, why were we singled out? What did we do wrong? Well, nothing except that we look like the enemy, and that really frightened folks. Several generations later, Jerry brought shame, hazukashi, to herself, to her family, to her Japanese American community when she became pregnant at 18. And no amount of threats, pleading, demands, shouting, anything would make her name the father of her baby. So Jerry gave her baby daughter 2 interesting names. Her first name, her American name, is Topaz. Jerry deliberately named her after the relocation camp that her ancestors were interred in. Her daughter's Japanese name, Aiko, one of the translations of this name is love child. So, ironic, sarcastic, getting her own back. On some level, what Jerry is saying to herself and to her family and to her Japanese community is that I'm not living my life in shame and hazukashi. This is my daughter, this is my life, and I'm going to raise her without shame. And Jerry raises Topaz, Paz, Aiko, Miyoshi as best she can, mainly at arm's length, because this was the norm in her family. Seldom was there any kind of physical touch, hugs. There was no like hitting or anything. And there was never any verbal praise. There was a lot of scolding and a lot of those sighs of disappointment in that generation, that 3-generation household. Paz felt it, Jerry felt it. Remember that winged victory image that I've been talking about this past month? That imposing statue that depicts life? I see her moving forward to life, her arms outstretched, her gown billowing behind her like wings. For me, on some level, as I got to know Jerry, that's who Jerry is. She's worked, she's raised a love child with determination and honesty, and to some people, her life might look really small. She never went to college. She's only known life on the farm, which she really loves. She's never traveled. She's never been outside Watsonville except to take, short day trips. Still, I see her as somebody who has spent her life moving forward, arms open, living life on her own terms. She was a great role model for her daughter, who did leave Walkerville, who did go to college, who did live across the country for over a decade. And then her daughter decided to come back home, to be around her family and her loved ones. So that's Jerry's story. And just to sort of whet your appetite, in book 10 of the Walkerville Desires series, tentatively called Romance. So I wrote the book, I wrote the draft in 2019, and I just reread it the other night. And I wept after I read it, and I don't know if that's what writers do when they reread, a book that they've written. But there's a lot that happens in book 10, and Jerry moves forward again and again. And I hope that you read that book as well as reading the other Walkerville books when that book comes out. Thanks for joining me tonight. I'll be back on Friday to share with you what the theme song is for this book, Renaissance. It really surprised me. I've got to tell you, the theme song. So remember to check just below this video. YouTube counts everything, so it means a lot if you can give us a thumbs up. And it's really helpful if you subscribe to my channel by clicking the big red button. And if you have questions or comments, there's links to my Facebook and Instagram and my email address. Remember that AC is archiving all of these. Check the playlist on my page. Plus, the direct link for Friday night's live stream is there as well. Again, thanks for joining me, and hope to see you on Friday.